Overview. Walter Isaacson's Steve Jobs 2011 is a biography of the late founder and leader of Apple Computer. In 1976, Jobs founded Apple with a friend in his parents' garage. 35 years later, after a series of hugely successful product releases including the iPod, iTunes, the iPhone, and the iPad, Apple became the most highly valued company in the world. Jobs was not only a major influence in the computer industry. During the 1990s, after he left Apple, Jobs purchased and led Pixar, the pioneering digital animation company. Returning to Apple in 1997, Jobs led the company through its most successful period ever. In 2003, Jobs was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Though he continued working long into his illness, he was eventually forced to resign. He died in 2011. Written at its subject's request, Steve Jobs is a biography of Jobs from his birth in San Francisco in 1955 to his resignation as Apple's CEO shortly before his death. The book is based on interviews with Jobs and with a number of other people close to him, including colleagues from Apple's early days, fellow executives from its boom years, old girlfriends, and his wife. Jobs' biological parents were a woman from rural Wisconsin and a Syrian immigrant, both 23 years old at the time of his birth. As an infant, he was adopted by a middle-class couple who settled in Mountain View, California, near the eventual headquarters of Apple Computer. Growing up, Jobs knew little about his biological mother and virtually nothing about his father. Later in life, as an international celebrity, he even went to a restaurant his father owned near San Jose and shook his father's hand without knowing they were related. According to friends and family, the feeling that Jobs had been abandoned by his biological parents would be one of the driving influences in his life, leading him to lash out and be cruel to the people around him when he believed they had failed him. In 1970, Jobs was attending high school in Cupertino. There he was first introduced to the works of renowned poets such as Dylan Thomas and musicians, particularly Bob Dylan. While in high school, Jobs met Steve Wozniak, a socially awkward but gifted computer hobbyist. Jobs was not a computer programmer or engineer, but the two friends believed they balanced each other out. Wozniak was immature for his age, while Jobs was the opposite. While in high school, Jobs took LSD for the first time. Dropping acid was an intensely moving experience for him. As he would throughout his life, Jobs straddled distinct social groups in high school. He identified with those who were mainly interested in music and literature, as well as those who were interested in science and engineering. The combination of the two would remain a theme throughout his life and career. Shortly after dropping out of Reed College in 1972, Jobs traveled to India to learn more about Hindu spirituality. While there, he sharpened his understanding of the difference between intuition and knowledge, arguing later that having a strong intuition was more important than logic and analysis. Jobs came to realize that although he was not an abnormally intelligent person, he had extraordinary intuition. This was the source of his genius as a business leader. In 1975, Wozniak combined a microprocessor with a screen and a keyboard, allowing for the first time the machine's operator to type letters into a computer and watch them appear on the screen. Jobs was enormously impressed. Soon after, Jobs and Wozniak founded Apple Computer, which combined Wozniak's gift for building computer hardware with Jobs' talent for persuading people to take an interest in his projects. At the time, Wozniak considered himself a hobbyist and embodied the hacker belief that information should be free. He drew up schematics for computers and gave them away to friends. Jobs, however, saw the company as a vehicle for their creative endeavors. Although he was not motivated by a desire for wealth, he believed the company should seek a profit, if only to keep the endeavor going. With Jobs' encouragement, Wozniak built a series of combined monitors, keyboards, and microprocessors in wooden cases called the Apple I and sold them to friends and local computer stores. The computer was an instant success and the first of several technical and commercial achievements leading up to Apple's initial public offering on December 12, 1980. Although Jobs was always an inspiration to others at Apple, it was a number of years before he was ready to be the company's official leader. He was often abrasive with staff, ignored facts he disliked, and became extremely emotional during meetings. In 1983, at Jobs' urging, Apple hired John Scully, an executive at PepsiCo, as president of the company. Scully had no prior experience at a technology company. However, he was an adept marketer, and Jobs had always been a believer in the importance of marketing to bring the work of engineers to the world. In 1984, Apple introduced the Macintosh, the first mass-market computer to use a mouse and a graphical interface. Having a graphical interface meant the computer rendered individual pixels to form the shape of customized fonts and icons instead of rendering letters in the way that all previous mass-market computers had done. Unlike previous Apple computers, the Macintosh was also a closed system, meaning owners could not modify it as they wanted. The closed system would remain a trait of Apple products into the future. When the Macintosh failed to meet sales expectations, Jobs became irate and prone to mood swings, frequently lashing out at employees for the company's struggles. Following this series of breakdowns, Scully initiated the process of removing Jobs from his leadership role at Apple. Jobs then went on to start another company, Next Computer, which designed and built high-end computers and software for universities. At Next, Jobs indulged in his tendency toward perfectionism to the detriment of the company and its products. He insisted, for example, that the core of the computer's hardware be housed in a cube, despite the fact that a cube posed an engineering challenge and was more expensive to manufacture. In 1986, Jobs purchased Pixar, a graphics and hardware division of Lucasfilm, for almost $50 million. Jobs saw Pixar's leaders as fellow creative souls and encouraged them to pursue their own films. The first of these was Toy Story, which benefited from creative input and distribution through a relationship with Disney, which Jobs brokered. Toy Story kicked off a trend in computer-animated films, and Pixar made Jobs a billionaire. In 1997, Jobs returned to Apple to correct some of the flaws he saw in the company's management under Scully. The company, he believed, had shifted its priorities from making great products that could sell well and make money to simply making as much money as quickly as possible. Over the next several years, Jobs solidified his control and eventually became CEO. For several years, Jobs served as both CEO of Apple and Pixar, a stressful period which he later blamed for a breakdown in his health. By this time, Jobs had fathered 3 children with his wife, Lorene Powell, and another child, Lisa, with a prior girlfriend. He saw his family very little. Under Jobs' leadership, Apple entered a period of commercial success, beginning with the release of the iMac in 1998, followed by the iPod in 2001. Throughout this time, Jobs demanded that his engineers design products that were simple, easy to understand, and intuitive to use. The iPod became an extraordinarily successful product, outselling every other portable music player, largely because of its design. To supply the iPod with music, Jobs introduced the iTunes Store, which sold individual songs for 99 cents. The store exceeded 6 million downloads in its first week, making it the first ever successful attempt to sell digital music on a large scale. The iTunes Store demonstrated Jobs' desire for an integrated system in which Apple software worked seamlessly with Apple hardware. These traits would carry over into Apple's next major successes, the iPhone and the iPad. Under Jobs' direction, Apple introduced the App Store, a digital marketplace for software to use with Apple phones, tablets, and computers. With the success of the App Store and the iPhone in particular, Apple became the most valuable corporation in the world. In 2003, Jobs was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Just as he had ignored other inconvenient facts in his life and at Apple, he dismissed the advice of his doctors, avoiding surgery in favor of a strict vegan diet and acupuncture. For the next several years, Jobs' health progressively worsened. During intermittent periods when he regained some strength, he devoted his time to Apple over his family. In 2011, Jobs took a final leave of absence from the company. He died a short time later. Analysis. Character analysis. Steve Jobs. Jobs was an erratic business leader who was mean and cruel to his staff. He was also a perfectionist who inspired the people under him to achieve things they may not have been able to do in any other circumstance. In his 2011 book, America's Obsessives, journalist Joshua Kendall argues that Jobs' harsh personality stemmed from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, OCPD. People with OCPD, he writes, are often frustrated by social interactions because they feel the people around them fail to live up to their standards. They obsess over minute details in ways that confound or surprise those around them. Jobs, Kendall writes, would review written documents that had been reviewed by other staff numerous times and still find typos. This kind of concern for such small details is uncommon among executives of large corporations. But it's only because Jobs sustained such a concern for small details that Apple was able to build products that allowed it to become a massive corporation in the first place. John Scully. Scully was responsible for the hugely successful Pepsi Generation advertising campaign. In 1983, at Jobs' urging, Apple hired him as CEO. In his 1989 memoir Odyssey, From Pepsi to Apple, A Journey of Adventure, Ideas, and the Future, Scully writes that he knew nothing about computers and was brought on purely to bring marketing knowledge to the company. One of his early goals, he wrote, was to refashion Apple first and foremost as a consumer marketing company. In a 2010 interview with the website Cult of Mac, Scully described a story from his time at Pepsi to illustrate the importance of marketing and which captivated Jobs. There was, he said, very little difference between Pepsi and Coca-Cola, yet Coke outsold Pepsi at a rate of 9-1. Market research even found that when people served Pepsi to guests, they were more likely to pour it in a glass in the kitchen and leave the bottle behind, whereas when they served Coke, they tended to bring the bottle and glasses out and pour the Coke in a glass in front of their guests. People were often proud to serve Coke and ashamed to serve Pepsi. The challenge, Scully said, was to change people's perceptions of Pepsi. Similarly, he told Jobs, Apple had to change perceptions of Apple and Apple products. Relationships. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Jobs and Wozniak began their company with the complementary relationship they had in high school. Where Jobs had a tendency to be harsh and unforgiving, Wozniak was kind and conciliatory. In the early days of Apple, the two created a balance between engineering proficiency and marketing, which would define Apple throughout its history. In a 2014 interview with the Charlotte Business Journal, Wozniak said that Jobs' personality changed after they founded Apple, and that he disliked Jobs' personality as a business person. Wozniak said he judged people by how nice they are, and that Jobs was not a nice person after founding Apple. Jobs became especially abusive to his staff after the first Macintosh's tepid commercial release in 1984. A number of Apple's top engineers, Wozniak said, told him they would never work with Jobs again after the experience of working with him on the Macintosh project. Steve Jobs and John Scully. In his early courtship of the PepsiCo executive, Jobs manipulated Scully, making Scully believe they were kindred spirits when Jobs never considered Scully an equal. The two executives were destined to clash from the beginning. In a 2012 interview with the BBC, Scully defended his tenure at Apple. At the time he left, he said the company had $2 billion in cash, despite some product failures. One of these failures, and the one which led to Jobs falling out with Scully, was that of the Macintosh Office software package, which Apple introduced in 1985. Looking back, Scully said part of the reason the software failed to sell well was that personal computer technology was not yet powerful enough to support it. Another disagreement concerned the Apple II and the Macintosh. As Macintosh sales slumped, Scully believed Apple should promote the Apple II to generate profits. Jobs, however, wanted to cut the price of the Macintosh to increase its sales. When Scully told Jobs this was not possible, the two had a major disagreement. Remembering his relationship with Scully, Jobs believed Scully had prioritized making money over making great products. When he returned to lead the company, Jobs maintained that profits would only be the means to keeping the company alive, whereas developing great products would be the primary purpose of the company. Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. The companies led by Jobs and Gates, Apple and Microsoft, were competitors since the 1980s. Throughout the 1990s, the two companies were involved in a long patent war, with Apple claiming Microsoft had ripped off Apple's ideas, but Jobs and Gates also considered each other personal rivals. In an interview given after Jobs' death, Gates reflected on his relationship with Jobs and suggested Isaacson's account of their rivalry had been exaggerated. Even when Jobs was highly critical of him, Gates said that he respected Jobs and his work. Moreover, Gates believes competition was positive for the industry and had helped to advance the field. Gates said he felt no need to forgive Jobs for his earlier criticism. Steve Jobs and Laurene Powell Jobs. Jobs was involved with a number of women in his life, but Lorraine Powell was a stabilizing influence in what was often an emotionally tumultuous life. Jobs had 3 children with Powell, and towards the end of his life, Powell said she wished Jobs had spent more time with them. In an interview with NBC, Powell spoke of her deceased husband's 2 legacies, one public and one private. The private legacy was formed by the family he left behind, and the public legacy was formed by the products he created at Apple. Being surrounded by Jobs' life's work, she said, was a comfort for the family now that he was gone. Themes. Abandonment. Jobs was born out of wedlock and put up for adoption when he was an infant. Although he was adopted by loving parents, his colleagues believed that knowing he had been abandoned was a driving influence throughout his life, leading him to desire the approval of others in his work as a business leader. As a 23-year-old man, however, Jobs repeated his father's mistake when he had a child of his own. Lisa denied any relation and abandoned her. In her memoir, The Bite in the Apple, a memoir of my life with Steve Jobs, 2013, Lisa's mother, Chrisanne Brennan, describes the moment Jobs told Lisa that he was her father. Jobs had denied he was the father, but after taking a paternity test, he was forced to face the truth. Finally, in 1980, when Lisa was 2 years old, Jobs unexpectedly visited her at Brennan's home in Oregon, where Lisa and Brennan were sitting on the floor together. Jobs sat on the floor next to both of them and smiled as he told Lisa he was her father. As Brennan described the scene, it was like some kind of Darth Vader moment. Jobs then told Lisa he was one of the most important people in her life. Lisa, Brennan writes, was unsure what Jobs was saying, and Brennan was unsure how to help her. As a teenager, Lisa and Jobs developed a relationship. She moved between her parents' homes, but the relationship was always strained and colored by the fact that Jobs had abandoned her when she was born. Denial. Jobs often dealt with inconvenient facts by denying them outright. Apple employees called this pattern of denial Jobs' reality distortion field, and it arose in both Jobs' personal and professional life. As a young man, Jobs denied his paternity to Lisa. Decades later, he ignored his doctor's insistence that he have surgery to fight the pancreatic cancer that threatened his life. While Jobs' denial of inarguable facts had some detrimental effects, others have said it was essential to making Apple the success that it was. Andy Cunningham, Jobs' former publicist, said Jobs' denialism allowed Apple to achieve impossible feats. By telling Apple staff to do work they believed was impossible, she says, Jobs was able to elevate their creative output to unprecedented heights. In a 2012 interview with Forbes, Randy Adams, a former engineer for Next who worked closely with Jobs, said that Jobs made people around him think they could do anything. By believing as Jobs did, Adams said, people found they could turn their confidence into results, but only if they committed themselves entirely to the project. Perfectionism. The driving motivation that led Jobs to push his staff to such extremes was to attain perfection. He wanted everything Apple put out to be perfect and agonized over minute details that most business executives would not usually consider. In an article for Inc. magazine, Jeff Hayden argues that Jobs' perfectionism was a detriment to the company. Designing and releasing the first Macintosh took 3 years because Jobs involved himself with every aspect of its creation. Even then, the Macintosh was a commercial failure and led to a huge drop in Apple's stock valuation. Hayden says Apple was only able to move beyond this period of weak sales because Jobs learned to delegate responsibilities and trust his subordinates to manage small details. Artistry. Jobs considered himself an artist and encouraged other people in the company to think of themselves as artists as well. Apple was most successful, he believed, when it combined art and technology. The idea that consumer technology could ever be considered art is not uncontroversial. In a 2012 essay, Joshua Rothman considered the debate over Jobs' legacy as an artist. While people tend to think of artists as creative individuals building their creations alone, many artists command large groups of people to carry out their visions. Movie directors are artists, Rothman writes, but their daily work usually involves managing people and budgets. Though viewers attribute the finished product, the film, to the director's creativity, other people are more directly involved with making the images we see on the screen. Movies, however, are meant to be entertaining, whereas computers are meant to be useful. People buy computers to enhance their own creativity, not to put on their desks and contemplate. In this way, Rothman says, a computer is more like a musical instrument than a piece of music. The question of whether Jobs was an artist is ultimately a question about the nature of art. Whether or not Jobs was a successful artist, Rothman believes, is the essential question of his legacy. The importance of good design. Jobs was not a programmer or an engineer, and his sense of what a product should look or feel like often conflicted with the technical capabilities of the time. As a result, Apple engineers often had to work within technically complicated parameters that no other computer hardware company imposed on its staff. But despite the engineers' objections, the elegant design of Apple products is usually the top reason why Apple became so successful. Scully has stated that he and Jobs studied the materials and colors used by Italian car designers for ideas for Apple products. Jobs, Scully explains, strongly believed that Apple products should be designed with the user's experience in mind above all else. Scully believes that in the 1980s, this insistence was unique in Silicon Valley. Building companies over products. For Jobs, Apple's purpose was about more than making money. It was a place for the most talented engineers in the world to reach their highest creative potential. More than any of its individual products, Apple was the achievement that Jobs was most proud of. In an article for Harvard Business Review based on a study of more than 40 companies that are both widely admired and financially successful, Rosabeth Moss Cantor says great business leaders recognize that their companies are part of the social fabric of society and build their firms with that in mind. While all businesses pursue profits, she says, what distinguishes great businesses is that profit-seeking is not treated as an end in itself and does not overshadow the social mission. Generating money is only a way to continue existing and sustain their social service. Brutal honesty. While Jobs could distort reality to suit his own ends, he could also be brutally honest. In the 1980s, for instance, Apple was developing two desktop computers, the Lisa and the Macintosh. But after years of development, it was obvious that the Macintosh was the superior product. Realizing this, Jobs told the Lisa team they had failed and that many of them would be fired. Justin Gray, founder and CEO of the marketing firm Lead MD, says that honesty is essential for instilling purpose in a workforce. Employees who only hear a version of the truth tailored to accommodate their feelings are like people learning to drive, but in a parking lot. On the open road with other cars, they would be completely unprepared. When employees come to expect only part of the truth from their supervisors, he adds, they stop trusting them. Jobs considered honesty one of his most important attributes. Philippe Starck, a French designer who knew Jobs personally, says honesty was the trait Jobs wanted to be most remembered by. Important people. Steve Jobs, 1955 to 2011, was a co-founder of Apple Computer and was the company's creative force until his death. His ideas and aesthetic principles set the standard for the company and, through it, for the entire consumer technology industry. Steve Wozniak is a co-founder of Apple and the company's first engineer. He built the Apple I and led the Apple II program. John Scully was an executive at PepsiCo and later the CEO of Apple. He initiated a process that led to Jobs' departure from Apple in 1993. Bill Gates is the founder of Microsoft and its longtime chief executive officer, CEO. Gates was a rival to Jobs until he stepped down from Microsoft in 2006. Johnny Ive is the chief design officer, CDO, of Apple. He joined the company in 1997 and led the design team for some of Apple's most successful products, including the iPhone and the iPad. Laurene Powell was Jobs' wife from 1991 until his death. Lisa Brennan Jobs is Jobs' first child. Jobs fathered her when he was 23 years old and then left her to her mother.